My name is Lauren Block, and today's session is going to be about trauma-informed courts. We know that there has been an increasing trend throughout the nation to have more engagement of courts in implementing trauma-related principles, and we have three fabulous speakers with us today who are going to talk to us about how these courts work, what the work is that they do, critical success factors, including partnerships and how to garner buy-in from judges and other court personnel. They're going to talk also about common barriers to implementation and how to overcome them. And then they'll all provide recommendations to others for how to pursue this work. I would ask that folks put themselves on mute if you are listening in. Today, this session is going to be an informal dialogue. So I will facilitate the session on behalf of Pathways to Resilience, but our three speakers will be chatting with one another. We received a lot of questions in advance, and you are welcome to use the chat or raise your hand if you want to ask a question. We are not going to save Q&A till the end because we really want to make sure we have conversation throughout. So I'm going to introduce my speakers one at a time, or actually have them introduce themselves, because I think that's the best way to get to know them. And so we are going to start with Amelia Thorne, who is joining us from the great state of North Carolina. Amelia, can you introduce yourself and describe the goals and structure of the North Carolina Chief Justice's Task Force on ACEs Informed Courts?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to Lauren and her team for having me. This is a great event. So as Lauren said, I'm Amelia Thorne. I'm a professor at the law school at Duke, and I'm an assistant director at the Bolch Judicial Institute at Duke Law. I focus on judicial education programs, and I also edit a magazine on scholarly issues for the judiciary. So I'll say at the outset that more broadly, our institute is about promoting rule of law principles at home and abroad. And we see trauma education as a rule of law issue, which is to say that a program like this promotes confidence in the judiciary. It promotes procedural justice. And we see those issues as essential to making sure that citizens in their court feel heard and like they matter in the process. And that to us is the essence of being trauma informed. I became involved in trauma education in early 2021 when our Chief Justice, Paul Newby, formed the ACEs Task Force shortly after he took his oath of office. And here's where I have to pause and recognize that really none of this happens without our chief. I think as many of you know, having a dedicated leader at the top is truly invaluable. And he has made this work on understanding and helping children a signature part of his tenure. So that has been huge for us. And I know we'll talk more about champions later, but I also want to recognize the contributions of the Star Foundation in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have found that local funders have been incredibly helpful to us during this mission. So the task force itself is comprised of academics like me, but also judges, prosecutors, DAs, clerks, law enforcement, private sector attorneys, guardian ad litems, really the whole umbrella of the justice system. And we have sort of two sets of goals and two subcommittees committed to seeing those goals through. One pertains to programming. So this would be programs like safe baby courts and after school programs that tend to respond to the reality of trauma on the ground and try to respond to it. And the other pertains to education. That's the subcommittee that I chair, which is about educating judges, but also hearing from judges themselves about what will realistically work in their courtrooms and what they need to be more trauma informed in their jobs. And we can do all the research and provide all the data and advice out there, but it's not going to work if the judges don't feel engaged and supported. So we spend a lot of time getting feedback from them as well. So I'll pause there.
Thanks so much, Amelia. Next, we are going to turn to Mimi Graham from Florida. If you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about early childhood courts, what they are and how they got started in Florida.
Hi, so I direct the FSU Center for Prevention and Early Intervention Policy. So our space is really prenatal to age 3, everything that we do. And we really specialize in translating research into policy and model programs. And so we've been training therapists in child-parent psychotherapy, which is an evidence-based intervention for kids under 5. As you can imagine, kids can't talk, so they can't, when they're really little. So you have to be really good observers and know what's typical and atypical. So we've been doing the infant mental health work for a long time. And it's like, well, there's all these kids in the court that really could utilize this intervention, and we really need to integrate the infant mental health into the courts. So Miami was the first baby court in the country, and that was about the year 2000. And then 0 to 3 decided to make it safe baby court teams, and it's an evidence-based intervention. And then in about 2012, I see Judge Tepper is on with us today. We had a teeny little grant at FSU, and we asked Judge Tepper and the judge in Pensacola if they would pilot a little baby court, and we gave them a teeny amount of money, and it was just amazing. And the judges that we have that have just gravitated to this work have been just extraordinary. And Judge Tepper just transformed her court. She had dogs and pet therapy, and she had teddy bears, and she became trauma educated, and it really transformed how she did the court and the results in the families that had substance abuse issues for decades and then got clean when we finally addressed their trauma. So the other judges around the state were like, well, we want to do this too. We have 32 baby courts now throughout the state. The Office of Court Improvement, decided, their whole job is to improve dependency. And that's exactly what early childhood court does. Our Supreme Court developed best practice standards so that there's a lot of difference in Pensacola and Miami. And so this was a way that we could ensure that the same components and high quality were throughout the state, and then they could customize it the way they wanted. So we're really thrilled with the partnership that FSU has with the State Office of Court Improvement, and they have just been exemplary and having the funds, having the passion, and we have this shared purpose, and that is to improve the outcomes. And that's exactly what we're doing with baby court.
Thank you so much, Mimi. And last, but certainly not least, we have Judge Sheila Calloway from Davidson County, Tennessee.
Yes, coming to you all from Nashville, Tennessee. It's good to see everybody, and thank you for including me on this group.
Can you just talk a little bit about the work that you do with the juvenile court and some of the key components of that work and your role?
I will. I apologize. I jumped in before you asked the question. I apologize. But I just want to say I've been part of the juvenile court system truthfully since 1998 when I started down here as a public defender. And then 2004 became one of the juvenile court magistrates and was elected to be the judge in 2014, and just ran again for re-election 2022 and was re-elected. Woo! So been here for a minute. I will tell you, when I first started thinking about the trauma that court brings to people, it was literally when I was a magistrate and I had a case where very sad, traumatic case where someone died. There were some youth that were involved in the incident. And as part of their sentence, as part of their consequence, they had to go to different community groups and tell their story. And I went with them to a lot of the different community groups to hear what they said, and just to see what it was about. And at one occasion when I was there, someone asked, the parents were with this particular child, and they asked the parents how coming to court felt for them. And that parent said, when he walked into the building, it was depressing. And every step, everything about it, from the walls to the ceiling to the courtroom, from the benches, everything was depressing. And mind you, I had been working in the system for at least 10 years. And I was like, it couldn't be that bad. Never, because I'm here every day and never really thinking about that. And it gave me a critical look at really what we run. And there was all these people that come to the courtroom that are in the midst of a crisis, in the midst of trauma, and we have nothing to help them to get through that. And so I was like, we have to change this. And so when I became the judge in 2014, it was one of my missions to make this just a more comfortable place. I don't know if I knew it was called trauma informed. I don't know exactly what I thought I was going to be doing, but I said, we got to do better. And so we actually formed a partnership with a group called the Family Center here in Nashville. And what they said is that they are able to help people, organizations become more trauma informed. And I said, that's what we want to do. And that's what we're doing. And so we have since about 2018, we've been working extremely hard to be a trauma informed court system and to provide programs that are going to be results oriented, that are going to empower both our staff and our clients to be able to be successful in our community. And that's what it's all about.
Thank you so much. Judge Calloway, I'm going to ask you another question now to kick us off. We've gotten a lot of questions coming in advance when people are registering about what it takes to be successful here. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what kind of practices and programs and partnerships are necessary to kind of get the buy-in to do this work.
So it took a lot. It wasn't easy. First and foremost, I had to really concentrate on the staff. We had staff members, still do have staff members that have been here for years and have been doing this, the same way forever. And, why change? We're doing stuff. And so what I had to start with the staff and start with what, our mission statement is that we are to prevent problems, that we're to promote the positive potential of everyone. That includes our staff, not just the children that we serve, but including our staff. And that we're to pursue fairness and hope and to give everyone hope. And so knowing that, I had to do work within my staff. And that meant putting them in spaces where they felt more comfortable. I had probation officers that went to school and they got master's degree that were in the courtrooms kind of pushing paperwork and were unhappy with that. And they wanted to do more interaction and more things. And so we did a long study on making sure that we were providing for our staff the opportunities that they could have. We did this within the confines of our metro government budget, but we were able to change the way that we hired and promoted people. We were able to put people in different classifications so that they got on a scale that gave them bigger jumps when it was time for raises. And then we just applauded them for their work. We recognize that we work in trauma each and every day. And, every day I come to work and I'm like, ooh, today's going to be a light day. And I like, today's going to be a light day. I don't have that much to do. And of course, I walk in the door and there's something that re-gears my efforts to doing a lot of things that I hadn't planned on. And so knowing that, we take the time to highlight our employees. We give them time off so that they can have team building opportunities that they don't have to take time to do. I have an annual holiday party for the entire community where we decorate the entire courthouse, but just things that can help to uplift our staff and to recognize the issues that they have to face each and every day. And so once we got the staff to a point where they're feeling comfortable, and one of those things that we actually do is we have an employee assistance program. And a lot of companies, if you go to see your counselor, that's on your own time, that's on your sick time or vacation time, that's on our time. And so we don't make them take time off. You need to go, your appointment's at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, you go ahead and go. And that's still part of your work. And so we make sure that we're giving them as much as they can to be able to stick with the work that they're doing. And so after doing that and building up our staff, then we had to build up our partners that we work with. And so that was one of the things that the Family Center helped us to do. And we have these collaborative meetings. It's our Fostering Resilience Committee, and it's about 14 staff members from every team within our court is part of the Resilience Committee. And then we've invited some of our court partners. So district attorney, public defender, someone from, I think we got someone on the board of CASA that comes. We got someone from a lot of the different private attorneys that come, and they meet together once a month or once every 2 months, and they talk about things that we can do as a court to help support them. It was when one of those meetings, I think, that we had with CASA came up with the idea that, you know, our Department of Children's Services is so overworked and underpaid, and they just need chill time. And so what we have now is different areas of town where a DCS caseworker can just go, disconnect, breathe, sit, and have space for themselves. And so that was an idea that came out of our CASA group, that we needed to be able to offer kind of more trauma, a trauma-inducing atmosphere for everyone that works in there. And so it really is trying to build teams, and it's not just the court team, but it's the entire team of our community that works together in order to give the best product we can for our youth and our families.
Thanks so much, Judge Callaway. Mimi, can you tell us a little bit about the partnerships that have made things successful in Florida?
Absolutely. So I'm with Florida State University, and we have a certification. It's a 20-hour certification that a lot of judges and court personnel took, particularly during COVID. But we really brought the science to the courts, much like Amelia has done, you know, in North Carolina. And, you know, it was just amazing. These are smart people, but they've never had, you know, attachment science. So you show them the still face or the Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk, and it's just transformative. I mean, it's like they get it. It's like, okay, what do we do differently? So they were very receptive, you know, in hearing the science. And then it's like, okay, how does that change your, you know, how does that inform your decision making? So the Office of State Court Improvement was very critical in moving this forward and really adopting it. We had a Supreme Court justice who's like, wow, we need to have this in all of our courts, not just in early childhood court. And so that was pretty amazing. And then Medicaid was an important partner because the therapy part, you know, most all of our families are Medicaid eligible. So making that available to every family, almost all of the parents that come into the system have trauma. Many of them grew up in the system, they have trauma, then they get pregnant, and then the baby has trauma, or there's neglect or abuse. And so, you know, that therapeutic jurisprudence is really critical in changing the trajectory for multiple generations. So, you know, when people see this, you know, it's very compelling. And we've kept an evaluation for the past, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years of data from our early childhood courts, comparing them to our regular dependency courts. And it's really compelling. Some studies show as much as 8.5 months earlier permanency, and more likely to be reunified, and more likely to be reunified early. But if reunification is not an option, then helping to promote adoption or permanent guardianship within the 12 months. And so, you know, 8.5 months is a big, you know, big deal for a baby, for young children. But not only are we getting them faster to permanency, we're preventing them from coming back into the system. When you heal the families, then they don't come back. Just a quick story. We had a mom, she had 7 kids that had been removed because of her drug addiction. She came in, we offered her child parent psychotherapy. It turns out she was raped when she was 7 years old. She'd never had any therapy. She got the trauma treatment, she got clean and sober, and she got back that 7th kid. You know, we need to back up to the first kid, you know, and heal trauma trauma before people get so deep into the system, because it's tragic for the families and it's expensive for society. And so we believe that early childhood court's the best thing we got going in child welfare.
Thank you. I just want to note, I see a lot of questions coming in, and I'm going to start asking some of these questions. There's some great ones, but first, Amelia, let's hear from you a little bit about the partnerships and buy-in in North Carolina.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that our Chief Justice has been essential, as well as his staff at the Administrative Office of the Courts in North Carolina, local foundations, and I have a wonderful research partner at NC State, Dr. Eva McKenzie. So it's really everybody's pulling with the same oar here, and that's made a huge difference. We also really try to partner with the judges themselves and get feedback from them every chance we can. So we administered a pilot training in August of 2021. Basically had 3 sessions. One was on the brain science of trauma. What does trauma do to the brain and body? Another was on sort of NC specific trauma related statistics and information about the trauma movement more broadly in North Carolina, to show judges, hey, this is a statewide movement that we'd love for you to get on board with. It's not just something that we're asking y'all to do. Law enforcement is involved, educational sector is involved. So we're not asking you to do this alone. And then a third session led by 2 judges who are actually on our Zoom today, Judge Tepper in Florida, who Mimi mentioned, and also Judge Corpening in North Carolina, who were 2 really trauma-informed judges themselves. And they gave practical tips on what judges can do in their courtroom to make a difference. And after that, we led an IRB approved feedback program. So we got feedback from the judges who just heard the educational program right after it was over. And then we followed up with them 3 months later. And we published our findings in Judicature magazine, and I'll send around the link to that later. But let me just highlight a couple of things that we heard from the judges. I mean, there are too many to mention, but here are a few of my favorites that I found the most interesting and hopefully will be the most helpful to you. One is that judges want this training in person. I think the nature of this information feels really personal, and they want time to talk about it and process it together. So Zoom trainings, I think everyone has Zoom fatigue, but particularly for a topic like this, they wanted it in person. Judges wanted a focus on practical information. I think Mimi alluded to this earlier, but once judges get on board, they really want to know what they can do. And we can talk about getting them on board, that brings up different issues. But once they've said yes to this, they want information on how they can make a difference. Judges also recognize that at its core, this information is about sort of what it means to be a judge. It's not just about, a certain attitude or a certain training. It's about how you view your role as a judge and what purpose you're serving in the system. And so for that reason, we are launching this summer a course for new judges orientation for all the district court judges in North Carolina, because folks said, look, I would have really benefited from hearing about this earlier. And judges told us, bad habits can form over time. And if you can give people this information early on and get them bought in early on, you'll see a big difference. Judges recognize that everybody needs to be involved. A lot of them said, after some education like this, I've talked to my bailiffs about sort of talking to each other in the courtroom, or jingling their handcuffs, or laughing amongst each other, because sometimes the defendant or the child in the room will think, oh, the bailiffs must be laughing about me, right? Not true, but just sort of the judge is in this amazing position of authority to kind of influence everybody else in the courthouse and ask them to think differently about their roles. Some judges wanted like sort of explicit rules and guidance about what they could and couldn't do. So one judge said, I'd like to have a juvenile rule that says, quote, here's how we're going to do disposition. You can come down off the bench. You don't have to wear your robe. Some judges wanted that coming from like a top-down position. Other judges felt comfortable just kind of implementing those changes themselves. Judges recognize that they suffer from vicarious trauma. That's something we're working to incorporate into future trainings. Judges asked for a person with lived experience to be added to the curriculum. They said, we want to hear from folks who have actually been through the system, have experienced trauma, and we want to know what the courtroom looks like from their eyes, which we thought was really amazing. And judges also said, you know, we need time to talk about this as a group. So judges lead these very monastic, siloed lives where they're all practicing in different courtrooms. They can be right next door and not know what their colleague next door is doing. So they said, we want a chance to talk freely after an educational program like this and trade best practices with each other. And so these are all things we're working on incorporating in our new judges orientation program.
Thank you so much. And I see there's a lot active chat going on, which is excellent. I do just want to start bringing some of the questions to the dialogue as well. So we're getting questions about, and you just mentioned it a bit, Amelia, engaging individuals with lived experience, or as one person wrote here, victim advocates. We just did a session last month about the importance of engaging individuals with lived experience in policy and programming and such, but is there anything anyone else wants to add to the conversation? Judge Calloway, Mimi, or anything else you want to say, Amelia, regarding engagement in the community?
I'll add, we definitely felt early on that we needed to engage and have a victim advocate on staff. We had one, we had some that would work with the district attorney, but they only were here for a very small number of cases, and it wasn't as consistent as we thought we needed. And so we found in our budget a position for a victim advocate, and she does amazing work. And in fact, I think we're looking to add to her unit because it's just one. And so she needs a little more help. But when we gave it to her and said, whatever victims need, whatever anybody needs in the court system, whether it's a child just coming here for a foster care review board, whether it's a victim on a car theft, or whether it's a mother who's losing custody of her child, whatever anybody needs, this is what your role is to help provide that. And so she's grown that program. We do pet therapy now. We even are going to have our first miniature horse as one of our pets that are coming. Starting, I think, in March, we're going to have a miniature horse. She's the one that hooks. We have a restorative justice program as well, where we send some cases out that are felony offenses, delinquent felony offenses. We send them to a community-based organization, and they handle all of that case. And so she's the one that is the initial call with the people who were harmed, and she'll talk to them about the possibility of going through that program. She sets up folks if they want to do mediation. She does a whole lot of different programs, and we definitely find that we could not do this work without her.
Thank you so much. We have another question here about how we can be successful from an intergovernmental layer, or is the term that the individual asked. So looking at the local, city, county courts, the state and federal courts, how can we ensure that some of these principles and the way that this work occurs happens at all levels? Any thoughts there that any of you would like to add?
Well, we see a lot of rotation of the judges, which is, has its advantages and disadvantages, so we think we train them up in dependency, and then they rotate to criminal or some other part of the court system, and they take that trauma education with them, where once you see with a trauma lens, you can't unsee it. So that's one of the benefits. It's also really frustrating because you train them up and then they're gone, and then you start out with the new baby judges that, need to be trained. So
yeah, and I'll add to that and just say, I think the administrative office of the courts can do a lot there. So we're a judicial education by our nature. We tend to focus on judges, but as we've talked about, everybody in the room's got to be on board. And the AOC in North Carolina has done an incredible job of figuring out how to make modules that are sort of profession specific. So what are some things about that you need to think about if you were a clerk versus a judge versus a DA, and kind of rolling out trainings like that across the state. They've really taken the lead on that. So that's been great.
Also the trauma audit that the national, court juvenile court organization. I know Judge Tepper did it many years ago. They come for a whole week and they look at everything, the signage, the feelings of psychological and physical safety, the communication. They really do a very thorough, audit of how trauma informed the court is. It's a great thing.
Wonderful. We have another question here asking about the implications on budget. How have you needed to have dollars allocated for doing this work, or has your budget been increased in order to achieve this work?
Now I'll go back to my original thing is a lot of the work that we did not increase our budget. We learned to work within a budget. I will actually say when I started as the judge, there was some money that had been left on the table from the previous administration. So they didn't fill all the positions that they had, or they didn't use all the money that they were having. I was like, oh, we're going to change that. We're using every bit of dime that we've got in our budget. We're going to use it for something. And so that's how we were able to change people's classifications and change their salary base as well. And then working with, we believe in grants. And so we actually put in a grant specialist within the budget that we had. And so it's someone that can actually go out and help us to find different grants and write them and manage them and did that. So we have a grant person on staff. There was previously one, there is one with Metro government as whole, but you have to kind of wait in line for that one. And we were like, no, we want our own. So we got our own. And then, so that helped us to bring some more money to our table. And then we just do a lot of work, like with the Family Center, they do all of this work as part of a grant that they have as their organization. And so for the budget implications, it was something that we were able. Now, don't get me wrong. I always ask for a little more money because you never know. If you don't ask for it, you won't get it. So you always ask. Right. And so sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. But if we don't get it, I have that in my, we have made it work within the budget that we had.
And I'd like to say that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amelia.
Go ahead, Mimi.
Well, we did it with really no money, no new money, no dedicated money. And, it started small, and the courts were very resourceful. Some of them reallocated vacant positions to be the community coordinator position. The therapy was paid for by Medicaid mostly. And in some communities, the county or the Children's Services Council or the United Way, or, lots of different folks, saw the value and invested. And it was very late in the game where, the legislature, the courts asked for problem-solving court money. So we had to really compete with the drug courts, the mental health courts, the veterans courts. They put it all in one big basket with the baby courts, and we competed with them, for this small pot of money. Last year, the legislature put in $1 million for us to have community coordinators throughout the state. But now we have a plan, a 6-year plan, sustainability plan, which would expand early childhood court throughout to all 6,000 kids, or however many they're going to be then across the state, with a really braided funding plan. We've really looked at how much money comes into the state and all the different funding sources, and how we can leverage the Medicaid money and the other monies so we can really maximize the amount of money. We also, our Florida Tax Watch, which is a very conservative organization, did an analysis and a return on investment, and they ended up suggesting we have a dedicated funding source for the expansion and sustainability of early childhood court. I know, like, Arkansas uses their beer tax money. I want to get the marijuana money, or some, money that we could really sustain it over time. But don't let the lack of money, be the obstacle that stops you from starting. And then, like, Amelia's got benefactors who've got all kinds of money. We're very envious of her money that they have in North Carolina. So you want to tell them about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've put together these programs with a series of small grants from local funders, including the Star Weiner Foundation. It's been really helpful. But I will say, a lot of courts already have time and money set aside for things like new judges orientation or judicial conferences. And this is the time when everybody is going to be in the room together anyway. So if you can get together a group of experts who want to talk to these judges about trauma, they're sort of already there. They're sort of a captive audience. And I think really thinking that way, how can I hook into already existing parts of the system is a great way to think about it. And I'll also point out here too, that a lot of the recommendations we make to judges about how they can make their courts more trauma informed are cost-free. A lot of them are about thinking about how to talk to people differently, or how to think about treatment and assessment plans differently. So this doesn't cost anything. And that's been really important to us because, as in all our states, there are some counties that have more money than others. And so we want to be attuned to that reality, and we want to be making a bulk of recommendations that don't cost anything to implement.
I'd also like to add that, we had some communities that planned for like over a year of how they were going to start the baby court, and they were very strategic and planful. We had other judges that came to a training and said, I'm starting this tomorrow, and they just hauled off and did it. And I can't say that either was better than the other, because, you run into pitfalls along the way, no matter how much planning you do. And, and if you just start, at least you've started, and then you handle it that way. So there's no right or wrong way to do it, I think.
Thank you. And I love everything in the chat. We're getting all these ideas, and people keep sharing what you're doing in other places. I see in Nebraska, children getting books in the courtroom. I saw in Arizona, there are judges giving out high protein snacks to help you keep people engaged. We have the horse in Davidson County that's coming in March. So many different things. Keep sharing. In the meantime, oh, go ahead.
And Judge Tepper will tell you she had 3 bowls in her courtroom, one of condoms, which she invited people to take as many as they'd like, one of books, and one of snacks. So there you go.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I wanted to ask you, we're talking about lots of positive things that are opportunities. I wanted to hear a little bit about some of the barriers that you've had to overcome in being successful with this work. Why don't we start with you, Judge Calloway?
Yeah, when I came in and thought, oh yeah, we're gonna make everybody happy and everybody's gonna feel wonderful, I'm gonna start with the staff. I just knew that the staff were gonna be like, oh yeah, this is what we've been wanting for years. Finally, it's here. I found out that it took a little moment. It took a while to actually build that trust with our staff members that, no, really, I do want you to relax at work. I do want you to enjoy your job. I really, I don't want, to put you in situations where you feel like I'm going to fire you tomorrow for speaking out, about something that you're unhappy with. I really do want to hear that stuff. And so it took a minute to really build that that trust with all our staff members, which was super surprising for me, because as I had said, I was in the system. I had been here first as a public defender and then as a magistrate. And so it's like, I knew them all. So it's like, why don't y'all trust me? Y'all know, yeah, that's how I've always been. And so that was a minute. That took a while. Handling the public's misunderstanding of what it really means to be trauma informed has been a barrier sometimes. I'm always tickled, I guess is the word to say, when a kid does a serious crime in our community. So no matter how trauma informed I am, there's still going to be youth that commit serious crimes. But whenever that happens, there's someone on a platform, a social media platform, that starts tagging me and having other people tag me that says things like, you vote for Judge Calloway, you're voting to give this kid cookies and milk and go home with the slap on his wrist. And it's like when I see the news article, then I'm like, oh yeah, here goes the tagging, here it's getting ready to start. And so trying to really explain that to the community, what it really means to be trauma informed doesn't mean that we're not holding youth and parents accountable. We are holding them accountable, but we're doing it in a way that uplifts them and that helps them to be better people, and not a way that has to further traumatize people and put them in a place of more harm. And so trying to make sure that that message is always getting explained and understood, that it's not about giving kids cookies and milk and sending them on their way, but it's really about holding people accountable in a way that helps them to become empowered and to feel better about themselves. And then, just our building is one that was hard to, when I think about that parent that came in and said, you walk in and the lighting's dark and the walls are dark. So we have yet to really overcome that, even though our attitudes and our behaviors and the way we treat people has changed, our building hasn't changed. And so we are actually working on that, and we're working to have a campus. We're getting ready to build a campus. We've gotten the go ahead from our Metro government, and the funding is coming, where we're going to have like a 14-acre campus where it's going to be trauma informed, wall to wall, building to building. And it's going to be like a typical college campus, and it's going to be great. And so I'm looking forward to that. But those are some of the main challenges that we had in trying to change to a more trauma-informed court.
Oh, that's
And
exciting.
I echo what Judge Calloway has just said about accountability. That's a big thing we hear from judges during our work. They say, right, I don't want to be perceived as a milk and cookies judge. I need to be at least sometimes perceived as a tough on crime judge. And what we say to that is a trauma-informed judge is a tough on crime judge. These trauma-informed practices are actually, we believe, more likely to put people on a path out of recidivism. And we've heard from judges who employ these practices, once I got to the root of the problem, I stopped seeing the same people in my courtroom over and over again. So we work a lot on talking about how accountability and trauma-informed are not necessarily at odds with one another. But that is definitely one of our biggest hurdles. I'll mention a couple of others. One is just knowledge, just sort of, I don't know about the science of trauma. And as I mentioned, once people cross the knowledge barrier, they tend to be pretty on board pretty quickly. Some judges will say, I think the sort of another barrier is application, right? So now I'm on board, I understand, I have the background knowledge about trauma, but I don't know what to do about it. And that's what we try to do in our training. Another barrier we see from time to time is the empowerment question, which I mentioned earlier, which is, the science is convincing to me, I know what to do, but I don't feel empowered to do it. I would like to have someone telling me it's okay to do this. And that's where it's really big to be able to say, the chief is behind this education. The folks at the top want you to be thinking about how you can make positive changes. So empowerment is one thing that we do talk about quite a bit. And then resources, which we've all discussed, I think at this point, we're trying to come up with solutions for judges that don't cost anything. Sometimes we do have suggestions that might require resources, like painting the walls a shade of blue that is calming, or spending a little bit of money to get books and stuffed animals in an area where kids are going to be in the courtroom. In the scheme of things, though, these aren't huge expenditures. And as I've said, most of our proposed solutions are cost-free.
And I'd like to say, everything we do either can, help or hurt in the courts. And some of our obstacles have been the parents' attorneys, which are paid a flat fee. And so they want to come in and get it over with, right? And so they consider baby court the fast track to TPR, which is opposite from what the data show. But they basically, so baby court meets once a month, and there's once a month family team meetings and regular dependencies every 6 months. So it's a lot more work, but they get out faster. So, it's not more work in the long run, but it has been very hard to get the parents' attorneys all on board. We've tried having other parents' attorneys talk to them and talk about their data and how successful it is and all that. But and using judges to talk to other judges and lawyers to talk to other lawyers. But basically, they're trained to be adversarial. And this is a non-adversarial, it's unlearning, being adversarial. And so we see this real contrast, the judges that are not trauma educated and our baby court judges. We don't see kids moving overnight, to move from a family they've been with since birth, and the judge rules that they move the next morning, and as with no transition. In baby court, we don't do that. Our judges understand attachment, whether it's a bio family or a foster family. They understand the importance of transitions and really transitioning the attachment figure, from the foster family to an adoptive family or whatever. And the whole demeanor, the way they talk to people. We did a documentary of our families in early childhood court, and one of the judges says, "It's been a privilege to serve you." How many judges talk like that? I mean, it's genuine, and they're concerned. It's really relationship-based court. Their name, they're coming often, the kids, their struggles, and so it changes the adversarial nature into being relationship. Families they fall off the wagon, and that's not the kiss of death. It's like, okay, yeah, you did, so now how do you get back on, and how do we support you in that? And housing is a huge issue, particularly if you have a substance abuse background. And so we wrote grants for housing in Panama City, particularly after the hurricane, to help our families. And, we go the extra mile. It really is therapeutic jurisprudence. It's like, what does this family need to be successful, to get their kids back and to be a good parent, and to let them tell us what that is, and then move heaven and earth to try to make it. We remove kids and give people money afterwards. It's like, okay, what can we do up front? How can we really support the families, to be the kind of parents that they want to be? One of the parents, they come to family team meeting, and we write up, it's strengths based. So somebody went on a home visit, and this mom had these sticky notes all over her house of, you are a good parent, and you can do this. And just a lot of them have never had that kind of encouragement in their life. So our documentary is called Hope and Healing. I'll put the link in the chat. It really conveys both the hope and what it takes, the obstacles that these families overcome.
Thank you. We have another question here about secondary trauma, so for court staff, and if they are something is sort of triggering for them that happens, and what you do with regard to self-care. I know you opened, Judge Calloway, with some of what you do in general, just to be supportive of staff, but is there anything you want to say to open up this part of the conversation?
It is so important that we keep a check on each other. People need to check on me. I need to check on them on a regular basis, because, we never know what triggers people, or what could happen, or what they might hear in the courtroom, or what they might see. Our probation officers might go to a home, and how that triggers. And so we do a constant kind of check on one another, just to make sure that we are taking care of each other. And then, we do a lot of training so that people understand trauma. That I laugh at every time I talk about it, because when I say, "Oh, it's time for more training," my staff's like, "Oh, you're traumatizing us with all the training." But we do a lot. We talk about it a lot. I think it's important that they understand, and we do training about secondary trauma and vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue, and making sure people leave work at work and can go out and enjoy themselves. I talked about earlier the celebrations. We have court-wide things that we do. I do a staff appreciation every year where they don't lift a hand. I get caterers to come and they set up and we feed them and they don't have to clean up, and then most of them get the rest of the day off. Some have to stay here, but most of them get the rest of the day off. And it's just my time to tell them thank you for your hard work and just keep doing it. We play games. We had a mocktail party recently. We brought someone in to do yoga with our staff, the ones that wanted it. We had a Weight Watchers group that came and did provided services for us. We have a monthly newsletter where we recognize staff members that have gone over and above their regular job duties. But it is a absolute intentional, conscious thing that we do something on a regular basis to recognize the hard work that our staff do.
And Judge Calloway, I love how you show your appreciation in so many ways. And we know that, we can't give them $1 million, but appreciation goes a long way. We had several judges that had heart attacks, so they developed the trauma toolkit with a self-care toolkit within that. And our Office of Court Improvement also does a lot of compassion fatigue and, self-care.
I think I mentioned we're going to integrate this specifically as part of our trauma trainings moving forward. We found it's really powerful to have a judge speak to this and to talk about the stresses that they experience from the bench, and just to talk about practical ways that they deal with that. Some folks use an app on their phone. Some folks read books to get perspective. Some judges, call breaks and go take a break themselves during some testimony. So I think, again, judges hearing from other judges is really powerful.
I have to say, my staff is I have an amazing staff, and there's so many times that I'm like running around the country or running around the city, doing this, doing that. And then I'll have a staff that say, you're not taking care of yourself, do something now. And that they will call me out and say, you were always talking to us about taking care of yourself or taking care of ourselves. You take care of you. We need to see you doing that too. And so when you build that atmosphere, it's for everybody. And it's so important that I have to remember as the leader that I have to slow down too, that I have to show how to self-care my staff so that they know that it's okay. It's not just enough for me to tell them that, but I have to actually show them as well.
Wonderful. I just want to briefly ask one more question before I do the wrap-up question. So when we think about sustainability, knowing that a lot of judges are elected and that the leadership can make a big difference, how can we think about sustainability over time for this work?
Yeah, so maybe I can jump in there. Part of how we think about sustainability is leaving something for judges to have for the future. And so one question we got a lot during our pilot program was judges would say, can you just send me the study that says that if I implement these trauma-informed practices in my courtroom, I'm going to see positive effects? But we said, there is no such study, so let us build one. And we got a small grant from Duke, and we're working on that now. We're going to observe courtrooms, see what kind of trauma-informed practices judges are actually using, and survey juveniles going through court and see what their experiences are like and try to draw some connections there. So this is all to say, we're always trying to think about, can we come up with more research that will further this educational mission of ours? And I think that is a great way to be sustainable, because the trainings can come and go, and judges will rotate, but if we can put something out into the world that will be convincing to judges in the long run, I think that's great. And we're also really eager to bring this work to other states. So I invite others of you on this call, if you want to contact me, please feel free to do so. We would love to see this take off in other states that don't yet have a program for it.
And it's really changing the culture of the courts, you know, from adversarial to non-adversarial and to seeing with a trauma lens. And it's a pretty major kind of shift. But once you get a critical mass of people who think this way, you know, it really changes everything. So I think that's the sustainability.
And I totally agree with both Amelia and Mimi on what they said. And for me, you know, fortunately, it's at least sustainable for the next 8 years since I'm just got reelected. But knowing that there may be a time where, you know, something, no telling where I may end up being, we decided to make our trauma-informed court a policy-based trauma-informed court. And so we had each department from, you know, our warrant officers, how do you do trauma-informed care when you have to arrest someone or when you have to put handcuffs on it? How do you do that? And so each department has gone through their everyday, day-to-day obligations of their work and said, how can we do this in a trauma-informed lens? And we've written them in policy. And so we have a juvenile court policy that's trauma-informed policy-based. It's like a 200-page document, but it goes through every department and every department take on, including the judicial officers. And so, you know, me and the magistrates, you know, how do we communicate with people? If someone comes in the courtroom and they're upset and they start cussing, how do we respond to them in a trauma-informed way? And, you know, we don't, you know, cuss back, we don't yell back, you know, let them vent, let it come out, because there's a reason that's there, and we don't immediately have to respond in the same way, and we don't have to say, hold them in contempt, take them out for cussing me. No, that's old school. That's not, you know, let's figure out why they're cussing you. Let's figure out what happened to them before they came into the courtroom, and then let's work together. That's in a policy that those are the kind of steps that we take as we're working with people in our courtroom. So we made it a policy base.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so just to wrap up quickly, as we always do for every session, we'd like each of you to briefly share 2 actionable steps that other states can take to do things similar to what you're doing. So let's start with Mimi.
You need a champion, and whether it's the Supreme Court Justice in North Carolina, or whether it's Judge Callaway in Nashville, or whether it's Judge Tepper in Little Dade City, you need a champion, and that's the core of all of it. And then you need good partners that, you know, share the vision and the purpose. And I believe, you know, a small group of people can make a huge change, you know, by being committed, and the resources will come. And so that would be my advice.
Thank you. Amelia.
Yeah, so one, I would say, you know, read our article. Lauren will send around a link. Read our article about what we heard directly from judges about what they're looking for and what's inspiring to them. And then number 2, I would say, please distribute this bench card that we created as part of our task force work. I think probably most of you on this call know what a bench card is, but it's sort of like a small little booklet that judges can keep right on their desk when they're at the bench to reference while they're talking to people. This has a wealth of information on practical steps that judges can take to promote trauma-informed practices, but it's also helpful for sort of anybody in a position of authority. We've distributed it to law enforcement and other folks in the North Carolina community. So I would say take a look at that, and if you can forward the link to those you work with, that's a great step.
Thank you. Judge Callaway.
So for me, I'd say you got to start first with a good assessment of where you are and a plan for where you need to go. And, you know, our work and partner with as many people as you can to get that good assessment. It's not just about you and what you think, but everybody in the court, the users of the court, the partners of the court, get a good assessment of where you are and where you need to go, and then put that plan in action. And then truly be open for honest feedback and difficult conversations. I think when we talk about trauma and what triggers and the things that go on, you've got to be transparent and you got to be honest, and you got to be open for that open feedback.
Thank you, all of you. This has been fantastic, and we've had such great engagement also from folks in the chat. It's all been totally inspiring, and I hope we see a really big expansion and a lot of replication of these best practices. I wanted to, before we get off the phone, I did want to remind everyone our next session is in January 11th, and it's going to be a look forward for 2023. We have 9 new governors, and we're going to talk about what opportunities and where there's alignment with some of the principles of the work that we do with Pathways to Resilience and in your states. And then also hear a little bit from CTIP, our friends at CTIP, about the federal outlook and what might be happening, what we might be expecting in 2023 and beyond. So we do hope that everyone will be able to join us. Trish just included the link. We'll also, as I mentioned, we recorded this. We'll be posting this video as well as some of the key takeaways and many of the links that were shared today as well. I again want to thank our fabulous panelists, and I hope that everyone has a wonderful and healthy holiday season. Thank you for joining us today.